Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a webinar on CSPI's first ever newly released school meals corporate report card for 2021. Just want to go over some logistics and then I'll introduce my colleague Megan, who will be presenting, and then we would love to hear questions from you all. So we'll begin shortly. You are all muted. This webinar will be recorded. We'll send out the recording afterwards. We'll also post it on our website. Please do submit questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A box, so you can all see the Q&A logo at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom window. And we will have a Q&A that will follow the presentation. There's also the chats. You can send a message to us, and we can also address any concerns or questions that you have that way as well. And so without further ado, Meghan Maroney is a senior policy associate at the Center for Science and Public Interest, where she works on federal, state, and local school food policy advocacy. Meghan has a BS in health science from the University of Miami, a Master of Public Health from George Washington University's Milken Institute School of Public Health. And prior to joining CSPI, Meghan worked at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And I'm Colin Schwartz, Deputy Director of Federal Affairs at CSPI. And so please welcome Meghan, and Meghan, take it away.
Thanks, Colin. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited that you all are here today to talk about our school meals corporate report card. So in this report, we looked at 28 of the top major food companies in the K through 12 market and assessed their products against science-based nutrition standards. So just a quick agenda for today. First, we'll go through the methods, then we'll talk about our analysis of products, talk through some of our results, limitations, and then our recommendations for USDA. So to start out with company selection, we pulled from Food Processing's 45th annual top 100 list for the year 2020, which was the most recent year available when we started data collection. We had hoped to identify which companies had the greatest K through 12 market share, but we quickly learned that this information is proprietary, and unfortunately we weren't able to get that information from companies. So we used this top 100 list as a proxy. And there are some limitations to this strategy, which we're going to discuss later. Companies were excluded if they don't sell foods and beverages that were marketed for K-12. So for example, Anheuser-Busch is not in the K through 12 space. They were also excluded if they only sell snacks and beverages. This report card only focused on reimbursable meals, products that you would see on the lunch tray or breakfast tray. So if it was just snacks or just beverages like Coca-Cola, a company was excluded. And lastly, we excluded some companies for not having a K through 12 portfolio on their website. So once we applied those exclusion criteria, we ended up with a total sample of 28 companies. So our data source was, the number one thing we looked for was K through 12 product guides for school year 2020-2021. It's important to keep in mind that we were focusing on that school year in particular. So any new products that came out for this school year, we're right now in the 21-22 school year, are not reflected here in this report. And I just want to note too that, the COVID pandemic has impacted supply chain and the products that are available. So there are some changes that have occurred to companies' portfolios that, might not be reflected in this report. But going back to the data collection, so we prioritized K through 12 product guides. We also looked at ingredients lists, nutrition facts labels, and child nutrition labels. All of these had to be available on company websites or provided by a company representative to us specifically. We didn't use any third-party retailers that may have had nutrition information, so that we were ensuring that we were using the most accurate, up-to-date information available. Our data was collected between December 2020 and July 2021. And we classified the products using school nutrition meal cost studies food grouping systems, which I'm going to talk through a little bit more on the next slide. We also identified top sources of sodium, which were identified by USDA, and top sources of added sugars, which were identified by the paper, Added Sugars in School Meals and the Diets of School-Aged Children. So this is just a sample of the major and minor food groups from the school nutrition and meal cost study. But so in total, there were 8 major food groups, which those are the ones in the teal rows. So milk, vegetables, fruits, combination entrees. Those are just some examples. And then there were 89 minor food groups. So for example, whole unflavored, 2% unflavored, etc. Our final analysis included minor food groups that, according to the school nutrition meal cost study, were present in at least 5% of daily breakfast or lunch menus. And you'll notice that some of the minor food groups here are bolded, and those are the ones that were identified as either top sources of sodium in children's diets or top sources of added sugars. So moving on to our analysis, we assessed all of the products on 5 categories: whole grain rich, if they were applicable. And so I guess I shouldn't have said all products, because this first one is only for products that were creditable grains. Were assessed on whether or not they were whole grain rich, which means at least 51% of the product is whole grain. We looked at sodium reduction targets 2 and 3, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. We looked at an added sugar standard, which is consistent with the dietary guidelines. We looked at the presence of artificial sweeteners of concern. We looked at 5 of them in particular, which they were sucralose, aspartame, potassium, ACE-K. And then the last one is no synthetic dyes. And we looked at, it's the numbered food dyes. So if you think of like red 40, yellow number 5, things like that. So this is just, if you're not familiar with the sodium reduction targets, USDA has exactly what it sounds like, limits set for sodium reduction for school meals. So they're actually not being enforced right now under COVID-19 meal pattern waivers, which expire this coming summer. But so kind of disregard this timeline up at the top here. These were the original timelines set by USDA pre-pandemic and pre-rollbacks that occurred a couple of years ago. But essentially, these are targets that are set in order to align school meals with what is considered safe for children. And it's based on their age group. So for example, schools are technically at target 2 right now. So if you're looking, at lunch for high school, which is grades 9 through 12, sodium content has to be no more than 1,080 milligrams of sodium. So we focused on targets 2 and 3 for this analysis. And then, so for our added sugar standard, there's actually not an added sugar standard in school meals today. There is a calorie limit, but which, takes care of added sugars to a certain extent. But we at CSPI are advocating for the establishment of an added sugar standards that would align school meals with the dietary guidelines. The last 2 dietary guidelines for Americans, which are the federal dietary advice for the nation and what the school meal standards should be based on. The last 2 versions have recommended that no more than 10% of added sugar, no more than 10% of calories in your diet should come from added sugars. So we came up with a standard that would essentially get school meals there. So we used the calorie limits that are already in place for school meals. So for example, K through 5 breakfast can have up to 500 calories. So we said, what is 10% of calories from added sugars at 500 calories per meal, that's 12.5 grams of added sugars or less. So this shows, the different targets we came up with for each grade group. So moving on to our results, I'm going to go through each category individually, starting with whole grains. This is an excerpt of, actually, this is the full table for whole grains. You can find all of these tables in our report, but this shows the range of company compliance with the whole grain rich standard. So this, on the left side, you can see the major and the minor food groups. These are all of the ones that contained creditable grains. So for example, you can see the first row here, breakfast burritos and sandwiches. The companies that offered these products were Foster Farms, Schwann Food Company, and Tyson. And on the lower end of compliance, 83% of Foster Farms breakfast burritos and sandwiches met a whole grain rich standard. And then 100% of Schwann Food and Tyson did. I do want to point out that this table only includes companies that had at least 5 products in a given food category. So if someone only made one breakfast burrito, they didn't make it into this table, but they are available if you want to export our raw data that is available online. So in general, we saw that companies had fairly high compliance. All companies had at least 75% of their products were compliant for 13 of the 18 minor food groups that had creditable grains, and at least 5 products from a single company. So we were really encouraged to see that that there was fairly high compliance here. I didn't talk much at all about, the history of whole grains and the rollbacks, but there, originally in the school meal standards, there was a requirement that all grains had to be whole grain rich. And then the previous administration, there was a rollback rule that came out that halved the requirement. So then only half of whole grains had to be whole grain rich, which took school meals out of alignment with the dietary guidelines. CSPI and a number of others sued USDA on that rule, and the rule was thrown out. So we're back at 100%, but with COVID, there's a lot going on, but we essentially just wanted to see, where is the marketplace? Can we get back to 100% whole grain rich? Are the products there? Is there, enough product availability across categories? And I think the results here are really encouraging to see. Okay, so moving on to sodium. On the left here, you can see a similar table to the one I just showed. This is just an excerpt of the table. There's a lot more rows of the sodium one, but so you see, if you look at the columns here, it's not just meets or doesn't meet, but it's we looked at meeting sodium target 2 for K through 5 lunch, sodium target 2 for for 9 through 12 lunch, and the same for target 3. And we found that most companies were close to or met 100% compliance for target 2 for grades 9 through 12 lunch, which is the most lenient standard given that the calorie range is the largest. And compliance ranges for target 3 for the same minor food groups were more variable. And then on the right side, we also looked at the median amount of sodium per food group. So we found with the minor food groups that had the highest median amount of sodium were sandwiches with plain meat or poultry. The median value there was 690 milligrams, followed by mixtures and other mixtures with grain, meat alternate, and or vegetables at 670, followed by pizza and Mexican style entrees. And again, just a reminder, anything you see bolded here is considered a top source of a top source of sodium by USDA. And then I do want to point out too, you can't see it here on the slide, but fresh or frozen fruit, dried fruit, and hot cereal had the lowest medium sodium, and they were the only minor food groups that had 0 milligrams of sodium. So moving on to added sugars, we saw that all companies were at least 75% compliance for more than 3/4 or 14 of the 18 minor food groups for grades K through 5 and grades 9 through 12 breakfast. So here, the table on the left, it's the added sugar standard of no more than 10% of calories from added sugars. Both of these are breakfast because we know that breakfast in particular can be really high in added sugars. And then on the right here, you can see the medians similar to the sodium. The minor food groups with the highest median amount of added sugars were canned sweetened fruit, which is probably not a big surprise at a median of 26 grams of added sugar, followed by dried fruit with 21 grams, peanut butter sandwiches, grain-based desserts, etc. And then nearly half of all minor food groups actually contributed 0 grams of added sugars, which is good to see. So moving on to artificial sweeteners of concern. All companies that had products in minor food groups with artificial sweeteners of concern had high compliance rates in meeting the proposed standard. And also we found that every minor food group had at least one company with 100% compliance for artificial sweeteners. So this table only shows there were only a handful of minor food categories that even contained any artificial sweeteners of concern. So this really just speaks to the fact that there's not a lot of products out there that do have artificial sweeteners, so it shouldn't be too hard to remove them. And we really think that if USDA were to establish a standard to eliminate artificial sweeteners, it is feasible for schools to meet it, and it'd be feasible for companies to just move to products only that don't have artificial sweeteners. And then lastly is synthetic dyes. Again, this is just showing the company or just showing the food categories that contained any synthetic dyes. We found all but one minor food group had at least 100%, at least one company that was 100% compliant. And 4 minor food groups had companies that were below 75% compliance for synthetic dyes. So again, a few more categories here that do have synthetic dyes, but I think the overall story is that it's feasible to eliminate synthetic dyes. In most cases where there are, products in a given category with dyes, we see that there are companies that have done it. They can eliminate it. They don't need to be in these products. So, we're almost there. We can do this. So this is just an example of a handout that we put together that shows, what I just said. Companies can do this. We found a lot of instances of some really not great examples provided by a company right alongside a much better example. So I don't know if this is too small that you all can see this, but for example, this yogurt, the worst yogurt that we saw in terms of added sugars was Yoplait Smooth yogurts with 11 grams of added sugars in just a 4-ounce container. But then Yoplait also offers Trix yogurt, which has 5 grams of added sugar in the same size container. So, you can make the argument that a school food service director could, just choose the better one, but also a company could just focus on marketing the better one or eliminate the worst one altogether. So all of these examples the side-by-sides are all offered by the same company for pizza, the worst and the better. It's Schwann Pizza, which is the largest school pizza manufacturer. For Foster Farms, we see a 350 milligram difference between 2 very similar burritos. Sandwiches offered by Tyson Foods, again, 230 milligrams difference in sodium. And then for post food service, we see this one on the left, Marshmallow Mateys, is a pretty egregious example that has 23 grams of added sugars, 380 milligrams of sodium, and several different synthetic food dyes. But they also offer shredded wheat, which is frosted, but even with the frosting, has 10 grams of added sugars, only 5 milligrams of sodium, and no synthetic dyes. And then here's a few just more product examples of some kind of surprising things that we saw. For example, I think when we think about food dyes, we think about those like brightly colored cereals that I just mentioned, or things that look artificial. But these onion rings, you might not expect that they have blue, red, and yellow food dyes in them. So these are examples of things. Why is it in there? It doesn't need to be in there. We can eliminate these ingredients of concern. Again, similar with the light and fit Greek yogurt, it looks on the healthier side. It has, the marketing makes it look healthier, but it has a sucralose and ACE-K in it, which have cancer risks associated with them. Same with this whole grain flour tortilla. A food service director might think, I'm offering this really healthy 100% whole grain item. This is great. You might not notice that there's sucralose in it, which is problematic. So we would, encourage Tyson, for example, to get rid of that in their products. So I do want to spend a few minutes to talk about the limitations of our report. The first one, which I mentioned already, is that sales data was unavailable. So it doesn't necessarily reflect the best sellers or the top companies in the K through 12 space in particular. I also want to mention that there is the difference between an individual product and a whole meal standard. So for example, the sodium reduction targets that I showed you, that table, targets 2 and targets 3, they are for a whole meal, not for a specific product. We said that a product could meet target 2 as long as it didn't exceed target 2 as a whole. That means that no sodium could come from anything else on the tray. So, we talked about the fact that milk has to be served with school meals, and should we, account for the amount of sodium in milk. We ultimately decided we didn't want to penalize companies for, a product that they didn't make themselves, the milk. So we just looked at, a generous standard of saying if a product meets the max allowance for a meal, then it meets. But just keeping that in mind, that food service directors do have to take into account other pieces of the meal that are going to end up on the tray when they're determining sodium content. The other piece of this is that sodium is averaged over a week. So some days you might be able to have more, you could have a higher sodium meal on one day of the week, as long as it's balanced with a lower sodium meal in another week. So, a product that might exceed the target technically could fit into a school meal one day, as long as they were served something lower in sodium another day. Adult portion sizes versus child nutrition portion sizes. For the most part, we did, like I said, we looked at K through 12 product guides, which were presented in like child nutrition portion sizes. But in some cases, if we just had a nutrition facts label to go off of, the serving size might not necessarily have been reflective of what's going to show up on a school meal tray. I mentioned this already, the impact of supply chain on product availability. It was something that we weren't able to take into account into our analysis, but we know that it's a real challenge for everyone along the supply chain right now. We also didn't address cost or regional availability of products. And then the heterogeneity of products within a school nutrition meal cost food group. So for example, one of the product groupings is pancakes and French toast. I guess this is the first one that comes to mind. So, maybe there's a really key difference between pancakes and French toast, but by putting them in this single category, we might be losing some of the nuances here and making the category overall look better or worse, maybe on added sugars, for example. Same thing with pizza, like pizza with meat and toppings was the same as cheese pizza. Maybe we could separate those out. Yeah, we followed the way that school nutrition meal cost study grouped products, and that was the most straightforward way to go about it. And I also wanted to point out, this has come up a few times as we've been talking to partners about this, that this doesn't necessarily reflect products that are available in the supermarket. This is specific to the K through 12 channel. So, our findings here might be completely different if you were to look at kid focused products in the marketplace. So based on our findings, we came up with 5 key recommendations for USDA. The first one being to maintain the 100% whole grain rich standard and begin enforcing the standard in school year 22-23. Again, we think it's feasible. The products are there. There's products in every category that we looked at that are whole grain rich. So we don't think we should lose progress on this. We should, commit and send a clear message to industry that we are, committed to whole grain rich. We recommend extending the compliance dates for sodium targets 2 and 3 with a short but realistic time frame, and provide robust technical assistance. I mentioned with the pandemic and with the the various rollbacks and changing of the rules around sodium, there's not been a lot of clarity for school food service on what the sodium targets are going to look like in the future. Again, we feel like it's important to stay the course and remain committed to sodium reduction, given the health ramifications of excess sodium. But we also need to, keep in mind that we are in a pandemic and there's been a lot of confusion and there's been a lot of just competing priorities. So we need to provide time for schools. They need support, they need technical assistance, but we shouldn't move backwards. I'm sorry if you hear beeping in the background. My washing machine is making a lot of noise. We also encourage USDA to establish a sodium target 4 with a more extended time frame for compliance to align school meals with the 2020 dietary guidelines. What I didn't mention earlier was the latest iteration of the dietary guidelines came out last year and actually has lowered the amount of sodium that is considered safe for children. So for children, younger children. So for grades K through 8, actually target 3 no longer aligns with the dietary guidelines. We actually would need to get a target 4 with a little bit lower sodium for those grade groups. So we encourage USDA to do this with again, emphasis on realistic timeline. Number 4 is establish a new added sugars standard that's consistent with the 2020 dietary guidelines. And lastly, phase out harmful artificial sweeteners and synthetic dyes quickly. We think that, as I mentioned before, they're largely absent from the marketplace, and where they do exist, they don't need to be there because there's other products that are in those same categories that don't have those dyes. We see many companies are already at 100% compliance. So let's get those worst offenders out of school meals and eliminate them altogether. And then lastly, I just want to show a little bit of a side by side of like where we are currently with USDA standards and what our position is. So this is kind of all the things I just said, but currently pandemic waivers aside, grain products have to be at least 51% whole grain. We want to maintain this. On the sodium front, we've got the phased in sodium reduction targets averaged over the course of the week. We are very much in support of those. We just want to see them strengthened to align with dietary guidelines. On the added sugars front, there is not an added sugars standard. We would like USDA to introduce one. And for artificial sweeteners and dyes, currently the nutrition standards don't say anything about them at all. And we would like to see standards introduced that eliminate them. And that is it from me. And now I very much welcome any and all questions. And thank you all so much for your attention, for listening, and your interest in this report. I definitely encourage you to take a look at the report on our website. We also have several appendices that are downloadable. You can see company compliance by food group. You can see food group compliance by company. You can download the raw data and manipulate it as you see fit. We definitely encourage you all to take a look at that and to ask us questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan, for that very helpful presentation. I put in the chat again the link to the landing page for the report and the appendices for more information. And it's great to see some questions come in. So again, just submit questions to us in the Q&A box. So first question for you, Megan. So this is a question about the methodology and data collection. So oftentimes companies don't list the nutrient contents for their K through 12 products. So how did you handle this when reviewing the product lists to map to the USDA standards, which are nutrient specific? And then another question similar to that is that that they noticed in our report that we verified the information with the companies, and how responsive were the companies to our verification requests?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, so that is certainly a pervasive problem. Companies not providing nutrition information up front. So like I said, we really tried to focus on the product guides, which I would say it was a mix of some of them, had a really good, like a matrix essentially of all of the nutritionals, on one document for all their products. And we didn't have problems, but when we couldn't, even with our follow-up to companies, when we weren't able to determine nutritional information, then we denoted that in our data set as unable to determine, and then those products weren't factored into the final percent or the final compliance calculation. So you'll see if you look into the appendix tables, there's a lot of asterisks throughout. If there's an asterisk there, it means that compliance percentage wasn't reflective of the full set of products. So maybe, let's say a company has 20 yogurts, but we only had added sugars for 15 of the yogurts, then the added sugars compliance calculation would have an asterisk next to it to denote that we didn't have a complete data set. I would say there was a big mix in companies' willingness to respond to our requests for more information. There were, some companies got right back to us and sent us very detailed, spreadsheets of their nutritionals, and they were very, open to providing it. And then some never got back to us at all, and, everywhere in between. So it was interesting to see the difference in company responses.
A related follow-up question to that is, what has the response been from companies to the report?
Yeah, so we did send the report directly to the CEOs of all of the companies, and when we could, we tried to copy all like relevant, senior staff people. We have had, so I would say, some fairly good interest in scheduling meetings with companies. We've so far met with one company, and we have a couple more coming up to talk through our recommendations. We sent them all a personalized letter with our recommendations for each company based on how well they did personally. Those kind of range from, we think, we encourage you to take a look at this product category, for example, might be really high in sugar, added sugar or sodium, and we recommend you consider reformulation. Many companies got the recommendation, please ensure that updated and complete nutrition and ingredient information is available on your website. So we're really hopeful that they take that to heart, and they're, open and interested in engaging on this moving forward. But I think the initial response has been fairly positive, and companies are interested in the conversation, at least, and wanting to talk through it more.
Just on the heels of that, I put in the chat the link to one of the appendices for a summary by each company, so that if people are interested in seeing how an individual company did, you could check out that appendix, which is a PDF. And then Megan mentioned this, but we also have the raw data for you data geeks out there who actually want to look at the individual products. That's Appendix D. It's the last link on the landing page. Okay, moving along to another question. You may have covered this in the limitations, but I think it's probably worth covering again. So when determining compliance for sodium targets, how did you consider school meals as a whole? And then how easy or hard is it for school nutrition programs to meet target 3 with all components on the tray?
Yeah, good question. I'm gonna just go back to the sodium targets slide. Oh. So, yeah, so this, Colin's right. We did talk a little bit about this in the limitations, but so we looked at a given product's ability to fit within a sodium target. So let's look at breakfast K through 5 target 3. This last, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but this one, that's 430 milligrams of sodium. So I don't know, here we go. So a product had to be could be up to 430 milligrams of sodium, and then it would be considered meeting sodium target 3 for that grade group. So we do acknowledge that in practice, that product might be too high in sodium, especially depending on what the product is. If it's a ketchup that's like a small piece of the the whole meal, then once you put that ketchup on whatever you're going to put it on in the entire tray, there, the tray could be very, very high in sodium. But we had to also keep in mind that menu mix and planning comes into play, so we couldn't really determine what else was going to be on that tray. And also we were keeping in mind that the sodium reduction targets are an average over the week. So yes, maybe that day is higher in sodium, but it could fit within overall a week, the sodium target. Colin, also feel free to add anything that I'm not communicating. Colin is a co-author and a huge contributor to this report. So I just want to point that out, that he is also an expert on this.
I think you covered it. And then sort of the question of how easy or hard is it for schools to meet target 3 with all components?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that's not necessarily something, we didn't look at all components across the board. It's a good question, and I'm not even sure how to answer that, Colin. Do you have thoughts?
I mean, it's a limitation of our report that it's impossible for us to combine components and then assess that against a target 2 or target 3, as opposed to just assessing by individual product. Granted, some components like pizza might essentially be what have all the components essentially that the student would be consuming, um, but it's just a limitation given that we're looking at what companies are offering to schools and having to assess whether the individual product was that salty or that sugary that by itself it exceeded the standard. And then, of course, as Megan mentioned, the sodium targets are an average over the week. So even if a certain product is very salty and could violate the standard, it could potentially still be used in a meal pattern because then it can be balanced out with less salty items on other days of the week. And the same for the added sugar standard. We estimated that based on that could be USDA. If they established an added sugar standard, we're calling for them to do it similar to sodium and also saturated fat, which is an average over the week. Okay, now moving on to some sort of next step questions. So what is the next step for policy change on these nutrients in school meals? And what can state agencies or individuals do to support these changes?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I mean, I outlined our recommendations for USDA that were, as USDA considers rulemaking on the standards, we are definitely encouraging them to take these into account. States can also set their own stronger policies, alongside or in lieu of stronger federal standards. States just have to be as strong as the federal standards, but they can, go above and beyond, and we definitely encourage them to do so. So state agencies, if they want to issue guidance to all school districts that they have to meet stronger standards, they can do so, and we would absolutely support them in doing that. And we, are open and available to talking through, different mechanisms for them to do so. Same with, it doesn't even have to be at the state level. We can encourage this at the school district level. Local wellness policies could address this. And we do have some partners that are working at the local level. I forgot the other part of the question. Did I cover everything? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we, I would say, yeah, first and foremost, we're encouraging USDA, but, everyone along the chain can encourage these policies and implement them on their own.
Another question, how has USDA responded to our call for target 4 sodium and added sugar standards? And an added sugar standard.
Yeah, so we met with USDA recently and presented these findings to them. I don't know that I can speak to how receptive or interested they are in this, but they were interested in our findings and wanted to learn more. And they asked a lot of good questions. So I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball of what they were thinking, but Colin, you might have more insight than that. But I was encouraged with their interest in this and yeah, and just wanting to have the conversation.
I think that's, they've been open and receptive to these findings. They're curious to see how companies were doing even in the first year of the pandemic with supply chain issues, sort of the progress that companies have made, and that there are a lot of products in the marketplace that meet the standards. USDA did announce that they will do rulemaking to update the standards with the 2020 dietary guidelines next fall. We'll see if they actually keep to that timeline, but we're crossing our fingers that they'll that they will in fact do that. And it's wonderful to have Secretary Vilsack championing both food and nutrition security, and both all the wonderful work that has gone into providing free school meals for kids during the pandemic, but then also needing to protect and strengthen the standards so that the meals remain as healthy and science-based as possible. So we're hopeful that USDA will stick to what they've committed to by next fall, coming out with a rule that would update the standards. And invariably, we think that would mean strengthening sodium and establishing an added sugar standard, because those are the two key areas that are not aligned with the dietary guidelines. And then, do you plan to do updates to this report card in future years? And if so, how often?
We do plan to update it. Before we do that, we have committed to 2 more report cards, similar but on different products. So we're going to be doing one on just milk, and we're also going to be doing one on competitive foods. So stay tuned for those in the next year or so. And then we would like to do this, over time, to be able to track how industry progresses. But I think the exact timeline and frequency with which we do this is going to be still TBD.
Well, that concludes all of the questions that we received. So with that, I'm happy to give folks back some time in their day. Again, thank you, Megan, for this wonderful presentation. This webinar will be recorded, so the recording is recorded. We'll send it out to all the registrants and also post it on the landing page on our website. If you have any questions for Megan, there's her email address. So thank you again for joining. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us. And hopefully we can all continue to work together to protect and strengthen the standards.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.